that the language that it's in is key or critical to anything. The Quran, one of the things that is peculiar about it as a book is its constant self-reference.
Exactly.
It keeps referring to proving itself, which leads you to believe that Muhammad had some problems getting people to believe what it was, because it keeps advancing its own arguments about its own divinity. And this peculiarity about the Arabic language, and it's not just the Arabic language, it's also the Arabic peoples. And in particular, Muhammad's tribe, there's even a surah devoted to the Quraysh tribe, his tribe.
Quraysh,
And
yes.
and so you kind of wonder, it claims to be both universal, but it's very provincial. Very provincial.
In fact, to add to what you mentioned, when we talk about the history of collecting the Quran, we're going to discover that the Quran we have today is actually in the Quraysh dialect. And by the way, this dialect doesn't exist anymore.
Really?
It's a dialect that is gone. So not only we have a trouble by having a language that is unique to a specific group of people, but also it's written in a language that even those people today who speak Arabic struggle sometimes in understanding it. I want to move on to another passage that shows, even though the Quran was revealed in an Arabic language, there is a universal message in there, meaning that it demands that people of all areas and all nations and all tribes that must follow its teachings. For instance, we get to one of the most famous verses in the Quran. Chapter 3, verse 85 says, anyone who desires a religion other than Islam, it shall not be accepted from him. Bill, this is very clear. It says right here, and whoever, in other translations, anyone. Basically, and the only religion is Islam. So how can Islam claims that it did not come to compel people to accept it as a religion, when the fact is very clear that no other religions will be accepted? Now, if Islam is a religion of peace, doesn't that mean that it should really invite people to a peaceful abode when there is some eternality to it?
Well, not only did it not invite them peacefully, we know from the history of Muhammad that he attacked the Jews. He attacked the Christians. That is, this, it shall not be accepted, was not just an intellectual idea. This force was involved.
But when I was a Muslim, I would have told you that it was in self-defense that Muhammad attacked the Jews and the Christians.
Well, he certainly had to leave Medina and go a far piece to defend things of people who had never been to his hometown. If it was defensive, why was he going all the way to Tabuk? How do you say?
Tabuk, yes.
Tabuk, to attack the Christians. And we know from this story that it was a long, hard, hot ride.
Absolutely.
It took a lot of work to go defend himself in another country.
In fact, it took a lot of work for Muslims to defend themselves in North Africa and all the way to the borders of
They
India.
kept on reaching out further and further to defend themselves.
Very good. All the way to the southern part of Spain.
Exactly.
Now, let me add something interesting about the Tabuk battle. Not only he went there to fight any remnants of the Jews that left there, to fight all the Christians, to fight even some of the Romans that existed in that area. One of the things that Muhammad used in that battle to entice his people to go, by telling them that their women are yellow, meaning they're blonde and they're white-skinned. Now, that's something that should get people who are chauvinistic, basically, to go and fight for Muhammad.
Well, we also know that Muhammad's favorite concubine, or as I call it, sex slave, was basically a white woman from Egypt, Mary.
Exactly.
She was Coptic,
yes.
And she was described as being fair, that is light-skinned.
Right. I think this will make a very interesting discussion when we talk about the life of Muhammad. I would like to also move on to another verse, if we could, so I can show my audience that Islam keeps insisting that its message is universal, that it came to prevail, in this case, over other religions. We find this in chapter 9, verse 33. As we mentioned, chapter 9 is an infamous chapter.
It's the last one,
too. In fact, if we want to understand the teachings behind chapter 9, I invite you, of course, to go to Bill's website. You can go to my blog, theQuranDilemma.com, and you can go to our book also, The Quran Dilemma, and we have basically dedicated an entire chapter in the book to analyze chapter 9 and its dealings with people of other faith. In this verse, for instance, says, He, meaning God, it is who sent His messenger, Muhammad, with guidance and religion of truth, which is the Qur'an and basically Islam, that He might cause it to prevail over all religions. This is clear to me that other religions are not acceptable, basically. In other words, if you don't follow Islam, you're toast.
But not just in the sense of what's going to happen after you die, in the sense of a political action in this life.
True.
And that to me is the most important part, that it's going to happen now.
I remember, you know, in our first episode, you mentioned that to understand Islam, you really must understand the life of the Prophet.
Precisely.
And by understanding the life of the Prophet, you will begin to get a clearer idea of the doctrine of Islam in general as a religion. And also, the Quran works together with Muhammad's biography and his own teachings. All of these that you call the trilogy in your website, which I like that terminology, do certainly serve as a complete package that will give you a clear understanding of where Islam is coming from and where is it headed. In other words, what is its political agenda. I want to show an example of some of the teachings of Muhammad, because sometimes we're taught that, you know, these verses that you're reading, you're really taking them out of context. They do not talk of violence. They do not talk of universality in the way that you're taking it. Well, let's take an example about some of Muhammad's hadith. And by the way, let's tell our audience what hadith is.
The hadith, or the traditions of Muhammad, are overwhelmingly important. As a matter of fact, to be a Muslim, when you read in the Quran, it is not possible to do any of the 5 pillars based on the information in the Quran. But even more than that, we see the importance of the traditions of Muhammad. There are 91 verses in the Quran which say that every Muslim is to follow the words and action of Muhammad, and part of those say, if you don't do that, you're going to hell. So the Quran is emphatic about the need for Muhammad.
In fact, one of the verses will say, whatever the Prophet gave to you, you must follow.
Exactly.
So Muhammad basically is raised and put at the same par with the God of Islam. His commands and the commands of the God of Islam are basically identical, because you are commanded now to follow. Now let's take a look at one of Muhammad's own statements, the so-called hadith. And we're going to show this on the screen. This hadith is found in what we call Sahih al-Bukhari. And as Bill mentioned, al-Bukhari is one of the infamous collector of this hadith. Let me add that he collected these sayings of the Prophet almost 150 years after the life of the Prophet. Whatever that means, I think you're smart enough to figure that out. Sahih means that it's really a sanctioned, a good collection that is authoritative, that is approved. May I add also that in this hadith collection we have about approximately 7,000 hadith. Almost 3,000 of those are kind of like the same story. So you take that out, you're left with 4,000 hadiths. But in order for Bukhari to collect those 7,000, he went through almost 500,000 sayings, tracing it all the way back to the Prophet, discounting some of them, discrediting others, claiming that some of those narrators were actually liars or untrustworthy, and there were certain measures that he had to take. One of those sayings, as we can see here, it says that Allah's messenger, meaning Muhammad, said, I, meaning I, Muhammad, have been ordered to fight. And I want to underline the word fight, because in Arabic it talks about physical fighting. To fight the people. Which people? All the people. Anyone who resists Muhammad, who stands against his teachings, who stands against his message of spreading Islam. So it's all the people until what? Until they say, the Arabic is La ilaha illallah, which is in English, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah, who is the God of Islam. What is the implication of something like this, Bill?
It says I'm in trouble.
Why are you in trouble?
Well, because I don't believe Allah's the only one that should be worshipped. And it's not, this fight we're going to do is not that I'm to be debated with. This is not an intellectual fight or a spiritual fight. This is fighting in the sense of the U.S. Marines.
Well, certainly, you know, the fact that Muhammad claims that his God is Allah is actually something, of course, could be disputed, because if Allah is the same God that claimed to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and Moses, then we can definitely look at his characteristics in the Bible, compare it to his characteristic in the Quran, and we have ourselves a vast difference between the two. But the point I'm trying to make, as Bill mentioned, that Muslims are commanded to follow the footstep of the Prophet for their own salvation. So if a Muslim would have to please God by following a command like this, he have no choice but to fight against all people. In fact, I wanted to go, as I mentioned in my testimony, to go to Afghanistan and fight the Soviets, because I believed in my heart that they're the enemy of God, and therefore I want to go and fight them. Now, I want to show something else here. The rest of the hadith says this: and whoever said that there is no God but Allah will save his property and his life. Bill, I thought Islam is a religion of peace.
Well, I have trouble with both my property being taken and my life being taken, may I add, and neither robbing me of my goods nor taking my life is what I call peaceful.
Indeed, there is truth to that. Bill, you know, looks like we're not going to be able to cover everything we wanted today about the Quran, but we will continue in our next episode, basically, to analyze the Quran as a book. But quickly, we want to remind our viewers one more time, what does the word Quran mean?
Well, the most general answer, the most frequent answer is recitation. But there are other names for it, even within the Quran itself.
True. And recitation meaning that to recite it again. And as we mentioned, apparently the God of Islam recited it himself to Gabriel. Gabriel recited it to Muhammad. Muhammad recited it to his followers, and that's how it went. In fact, it was preserved in memories all the way until the Prophet died in the year 632 AD. When we talk about how the Quran was collected as a book, we will talk about the different recensions of the Quran, and we see why preserving it in memory was actually a dangerous proposition.
Even Muhammad had trouble.
Basically, exactly, because we're talking about a fabled memory, mere human memory. Other names for the Quran, as Bill mentioned, actually, the Quran itself claims that it is called the book. It is called the codex. It's also called the reminder. It's called the light. It's called the guide. So, but just by looking at the name itself, you know that there is certain things in here that you have no choice but to follow. It is the book, meaning it's a scripture from God. It is a codex, just like the other codices. It is basically a guide. Guide for what? Guide for your life, for daily routine. And it's also a light. Light about what? Light because it tells you what you must follow. And it's also, another name is the Furqan, or the criterion, meaning it came to divide between the truth and what is false. And according to Islam, anything that doesn't jive with the teaching of the Quran is false, basically, even if it's coming from a scripture like the Bible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited that we are sharing all these material with you. I hope that you will find it to be very helpful, educational as we intended it to be, but also we wanted you to gain the advantage now from before, at least that you have it now in a language that is easy for you to understand, and that's your native tongue. One thing I want to remind you, if you please can go to our website and share with us your thoughts and questions. I'm Al Fadi, your host, and thank you so much for watching us. Mega blessings to you.